Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. I wasn't sure if I was going to get a bonus video out this weekend, but then, of course, Wizards of the Coast releases their preview of the Dungeon Master's Guide for 2024. Still have a lot of recording to do for other videos that are up and coming between then and now, but I wanted to kind of release this one because it's kind of a long video that they have. It's like 43 minutes long, plus the supplemental video specifically about the Bastions, which they kind of just repeat a lot of the same information from the main video. So I kind of wanted to just kind of summarize it all down, give my thoughts on it. Maybe this is a little more digestible for you. I even originally did like a more of like a reaction video to the actual release video that they did, but then I was like, this is so long. They're rambling a little bit here and there, are waxing poetic, and I ramble sometimes like I am right now. So I wanted to kind of just summarize things down a little more digestible for you. So let's go ahead and get started, see what we're working with. So what's new in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 2024? Well, the first thing that they say is it's bigger than the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, which I was like, okay, does that mean they just put in a bunch of new pictures, or what does that mean? And they said, well, it actually contains 4 brand new sections that no previous Dungeon Master's Guide has done before, which includes a section that has a bunch of short adventures that are playable right out of the book. They have a whole campaign setting that is in the Dungeon Master's Guide on its own. Usually these things are, supplemental materials such as these. I don't know if Spelljammer was technically a campaign setting, but things like that. They included a lore glossary that includes a lot of the big names and specific items that you can find within Dungeons and Dragons that come up a lot in the different books, so that a new DM who's just new to Dungeons and Dragons period can kind of learn what each of these things are and how they fit in the world. And then the 4th section that's new here is the Bastions, which we got a preview of that in the Unearthed Arcana, the 1 D&D playtest from last year. It's hard to believe that it's been a year already since those things have happened. But they provided a little more context around that. There wasn't really a whole lot of specific information, and I probably wouldn't expect specific information just from a preview, but I was maybe hoping for a little bit more, but didn't quite get it. And then, of course, there is a ton of additional art through the book that they mentioned, especially for magic items, which is pretty cool. We always like to see what those look like. And I included some of the art that they included in the video throughout this slideshow, so you can kind of get a little sneak preview there as well. So moving on, we got they reorganized the Dungeon Master's Guide to be a little more new DM friendly, because one of the big critiques of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide was that it really kind of dove right into the deep end with like world building and how to develop cities and population centers and all this and that. And a new DM, someone who's just new to TTRPGs in general, they're going to open that and be just immediately overwhelmed. Like, how am I supposed to even start doing this? Is this important for me to do? I have friends who want to play right now and I'm supposed to be the DM. Is this where I start? And of course, that's not really where they should be starting. So again, they have chapter 1 starting at the basics, saying, hi, new DM. Here's just the general information about what your role is, how it works, how to read the DM screen, how to get a party together. I imagine they'll probably pimp D&D Beyond somewhere in there as well. So that's just really good to see. I think they did say it's a relatively short chapter because it is, again, just the basics. Then it moves immediately on into chapter 2, which is running the game. And they said it involves sample walkthroughs of play, which we kind of saw those in the player's handbook for 2024. There's a lot of I don't know if you haven't taken a look at it yet. There's a lot of pages that have like sample dialogues of encounters that could happen and how those would play out at a table. Of course, those are going to be more player focused within the player's handbook, but the ones in the Dungeon Master's Guide, we would hope, of course, are going to be more Dungeon Master focused as to what the Dungeon Master's thoughts are and kind of how they're adjudicating things. They also said that it includes some basic but tried and true advice for tailoring adventures to your players. I think this is a pretty just important note in general, because there's nothing inherently wrong with playing. If you're using a book, an adventure module, you can play that right out of the book, and that's fine. But that doesn't necessarily create the best play experience, because you kind of want to, tailor things to your players. I guess I don't know a better way to say it necessarily. Like, your players are looking for certain things out of the story. They have their own backstories, and you don't always necessarily need to work your player's backstory into the adventure. Not every player has a backstory that they want to be explored. They just kind of want to play the game as it is. But they'll probably have advice for how to do that and how to make sure that your players' characters feel like they are actually a part of this world and not just sort of dropped into the setting and kind of going through the adventure as it is. They said that they're going to provide some additional tips for things like foreshadowing and other aspects of DMing that even more experienced DMs would be able to kind of latch onto and maybe learn a little bit of something. And then they said that there's additional guidance for running interaction as well as exploration, because previously they just had a section for running combat. But there wasn't really much guidance for social interactions, and they specifically mentioned overworld exploration, such as traveling long distances and playing that out. I think maybe many of us might kind of just skip from point A to point B, or maybe the DM plans out specific encounters that might happen. Maybe they're using a random encounter table, and those are kind of, I'm not going to say that those are controversial, but some people might think that just a random encounter that isn't attached to the plot in any way might feel a little like it's just kind of wasting time. I think Ginny D actually recently had a video on how to manage random encounters, so you can kind of go check that out. Maybe I'll include that in the comments down below. And then on the other side of that, they include the DM toolbox in chapter 3. So now that you kind of know the basics of how to be a DM or what the role is, and then you have all this chapter about how to actually run the game with your players, they include basically, from what it sounds like, is basically just another glossary, essentially, of all the building blocks for how to fill in an adventure with all the, quote unquote, physical things that are within that world, within that dungeon, within, magic items, traps, poisons, curses, siege weapons, building your NPCs, all the things that you're going to need to know to kind of flesh out all the tiny details. So kind of hoping that this might be sort of a reference document that, the Dungeon Master Guide is supposed to be a reference document, but say that you're trying to play a little more less prep heavy. So instead of having to figure all this out beforehand, maybe hopefully there will be things where you're like, okay, this thing is going to be cursed. I can kind of look up, see what they say about curses, and kind of make a decision on the fly. Just things like that where you can kind of, you don't need to have everything prepped ahead of time, because then you can actually use the DMG like an actual resource book in that way. So then it goes on to be a chapter for creating adventures. So this says it's a chapter that's dedicated for literally just creating adventures, not specifically for publishing content. And when they said that, I immediately was like, okay, we just had this OGL scandal a couple of years ago, and now you're saying that you're not trying to do things for publishing content. What do you mean? But they said that okay, this is specifically for setting up just quick adventures for your table. Because again, you're a new DM, you're opening this book, you have these friends who are waiting to play. They need you to set up something, so you need to be able to set up something quickly. So that they have this section about creating adventures, and then it's immediately followed up by 5 short adventures that use the advice that they just gave you, so that you have a visual representation of what that would look like, assuming that you went through and kind of finished all the steps that they suggested. They said that all of these examples are about maybe like half a page, if that. So it's not like the adventure books where it's like, you have this house and it's like house 19, and then this room is 19A and 19B and 19C. Like, you don't need to have that much information. You can kind of fit all the details of an adventure on a much shorter, sort of like a note card almost. So that's very cool to see. And then the maps, they included a bunch of maps in the map appendix for all these adventures, plus additional maps that you can just kind of use here and there if your players kind of go off the beaten path. And you can kind of see a picture of one of the maps at least, or part of one down below here. So going on from creating adventures, then they have the whole campaign setting. So they said this, this is of course the 50th anniversary for Dungeons and Dragons. So they're including the original world of Greyhawk, which was again the original setting for Dungeons and Dragons. So for 5th edition, I think a lot of the adventures took place within Faerun, at least. So that's, it's they use the word multiverse a lot within the video, and Greyhawk and Faerun both kind of exist in the same universe in that way, but you can kind of consider them on separate planets. But you can still access them through the Astral Sea or any intermediary planes that you can technically get from one place to the other. So if you have an existing adventure that exists within the world of, Faerun or Toril or places like that, and you want to kind of jump into this other campaign setting that they're publishing now for 5th edition, you can pretty easily do that just by, jumping into Spelljammer real quick to go across the Astral Sea and then ending up in Greyhawk. They said it's not quite just an encyclopedia about everything to know about Greyhawk. It's more of a skeleton that you can kind of plug and play and kind of build upon it. They said that it starts by focusing on the city of Greyhawk as sort of your adventure hub, which you can kind of see a small snippet of it down there at the bottom. Then they start extending beyond it to different key points, and they encourage you to kind of not be afraid to put things on the map that aren't there. And I think that's a very important point to consider, especially if you are a DM that preps sometimes too much, or if you feel like you're overwhelmed by all the prep that you have to do, because it is sort of a burden to do so, and that the DM does have a sort of a disproportionate burden of creating and maintaining the adventure, that you can sort of crowdsource your players for information, especially if they're going off the beaten path and you're on an overworld travel and they say, hey, what's over here on this map? I want to go explore over there. Even though they're going to this thing that's, you know, further to the east, but they want to travel a little bit north in this section and there's nothing there on the map, you don't have to come up with something yourself. You can be like, okay, what are you hoping to find? What is it that you're looking for? And make them come up with something, and then you can kind of fill in the blanks because you have the DM toolkit, right? So you can kind of like populate what's going to be there. Even though there's nothing on the map, you can put something there. I think two good examples of this are when Critical Role was doing the initial release for Daggerheart, and they did the one shot for it. They had Matt Mercer had the map for the world that exists in, and when they were creating their players, he asked the players, okay, here are all the cities on the map. Where are you from, and what is that city like? Like, what's the government? All this, and each player kind of picked a place, and they explained what that place is like. And so again, that's just more work that the DM doesn't have to do. And another good example of that is actually Baldur's Gate 3, which is if you actually look at the map of Faerun, we know that it takes place along the Keonthar River from between El Terrell, which is where all the tieflings in Act 1 are escaping from, and they're all going towards Baldur's Gate, which is just basically just right along the river. And you know, there's the mountain pass, which is part of Act 1, and there's no mountains between El Terrell and between Baldur's Gate along that river. There's no mountains. There's hills for sure, but there's no mountains for there to be a mountain pass. But they just put one in there because they needed it for the story. So that's a good example of that. You know, if you're working even on a pre-existing map that's published from Wizards of the Coast, if there are empty spots on that map, you are free to put things there. You know, you can just make that up for your story. That's perfectly fine. So I think that's really cool that they're kind of pushing that sort of creative work, especially between you and the players as the DM. I think that it's great that they're kind of pushing those sort of interactions. And then it moves on to the lore glossary. Again, this is kind of a quick thing here. That, you know, it just includes a lot of the big names of places, people, and things that have been published throughout the years. I'm not really too big of a lore nerd for Dungeons and Dragons. I know kind of a few things here and there. But I know there's probably people who know a lot more. And like usually when I do get interested in something, I'll do I'll go down the rabbit holes on wikis and stuff. But they're going to have names like your Igwilv, your Mordenkainen's, Baldur's Gate, what Mithril is, and you know, within the context of Dungeons and Dragons, because I think it exists in many different settings. But I don't know if there's going to be any specific mechanics for lore, because it is a lore glossary. But you know, if you're talking about objects like Mithril, I don't know if they'll have any, you know, things like the what was it? The adventuring gear in the player's handbook. If they'll have sort of little mechanical things that are expressed there, that might be cool to dig into. But moving on from the lore glossary, then it goes into treasure, which is they said it's the largest chapter in the book, so a lot of magic items. We like to see that, of course. They did say that there are more magic items, and I'm hoping that means that they aren't just porting over a lot of the pre-existing magic items from their supplements, like Xanathar's and Tasha's. They did say that they were adding some magic items from like the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. There are going to be some magic items from the characters in that show. But I also just hope that there are just more magic items to support underrepresented playstyles. Like we saw that there were a lot of tattoos and stuff that were released in later supplements to help like unarmed fighting styles, because if you weren't a monk and you were playing an unarmed character, you didn't have a way to overcome magic resistance. So just more things like that, maybe more bows, because there really aren't a lot of good ranged weapon options in the current Dungeon Master's Guide, or pretty much anywhere. I think in any supplements there aren't really a lot. A lot of the good ranged weapons I think I've seen are just homebrews. They did say that like they're expanding the, you know, like they said that the Flame Tongue specifically has a limited number of weapons that it can technically be, but they're kind of opening that up to weapons. So I don't know if you could have a Flame Tongue like longbow. That would be kind of nuts. But maybe we'll see something like that. Who knows? They said they also provided additional guidance for cost for magic weapons or magic items in general. And I don't know how well that's going to work out, because I don't think it was never like there was guidance for cost within the 2014 DMG, but it was never quite that there wasn't guidance for cost. It is that the power level within even a certain rarity, like within uncommon, would vary so greatly that weren't quite sure, like, okay, this this uncommon item is pretty, it's pretty niche. It's more of a flavor thing. I don't mind selling that for like 100 gold, 150 gold, whatever. But then there's this other one that's basically like a rare. It's basically equivalent to like a rare, even a very rare, depending on how powerful it is. And how am I supposed to price that one? Do I put it at the top? But I think it's worth even more than that personally, just because it's so similar to these other ones that are of higher rarity. So we'll see. I don't think they said that they specifically rarity shifted anything. So I wouldn't expect to see that if they didn't mention it. So I'm really interested to see how they provided more guidance around cost. They also said that they included rules for crafting magic items. They didn't dive too deeply into that. I'm wondering if that's going to be just crafting existing magic items, or if there's going to be sort of a build your own sort of magic item thing. That'd be kind of cool to see, but maybe that'd be a little more difficult. But it'd be nice if it was in there. Moving on from the treasure, we go into tracking sheets, which is another tool that a DM can use. I'm pretty sure probably people created things like this for online before. But these are basically just sample pages and note cards that they said will be downloadable from their website, and I'm assuming by their website they mean D&D Beyond. It's just for keeping track of things like significant NPCs and what their stat blocks are, and then any adjustments to those stat blocks, current conflicts within the campaign, and where the players are within those conflicts, how many magic items you've given out of certain rarities at certain levels, information about settlements and cities, as you can see in the picture down below. And there's also a bastion tracker that the players can use to keep track of what's going on in their bastion, because the bastion is something that the players themselves manage for their individual bastions. And speaking of that, we're going to go down into Bastions. So this is kind of one of the things that I'm most excited for. It's that and the DM toolkit. I think there's probably going to be a lot of cool things in there. And, again, we saw the Bastions in the playtest for 1D&D. They're basically a new name on the old concept of player housing and strongholds. So, if your party does a reward for a king and the king is very happy with it, then they might grant him like a keep on the outskirts of the city or something like that. And this is basically mechanics for how the players can build that out and actually interact with it in a meaningful way. One of the big questions I had during the UA is, who the heck is this for? Because a lot of the things that the Bastion can be used for take a lot of time. There are things called Bastion turns, which we'll get to on the next slide. They said that these occur about every week. In the video, they said about every 7 days, but I know at least Faerun that a week is a 10-day, which is 10 days. And a lot of the published adventures, things like Curse of Strahd, that takes place if your players just kind of go through it in like 3 weeks, maybe. Rime of the Frost Maiden is maybe a few solid months of in-game time. Adventures take place very quickly, and that's sort of a joke within D&D itself, is that players kind of go from exceptional people to basically demigods over the course of a summer. And Bastions don't really fit into that. So that's what they specifically said, okay, not every campaign is built for Bastions. So I think that's a very good note as well. That's one of the big questions that I have. Okay, it's like, okay, so these aren't meant to go everywhere. And they said that they're created to be a playground for players, giving them a chance to essentially DM their little space, sort of like a little sandbox that they can exist in. They control it. They have the mechanics for how it works, and then they can decide what happens. And I think that's very cool, because not only is it sort of a sneaky way to get players into managing something and kind of acting as a DM within their own little space, but even for, as a DM, if there's a night where you're just kind of not feeling it, but you still want to play, you don't want to kind of let down your players and be like, hey, you know what, guys, I'm not really feeling it tonight. We're going to just have a Bastion turn. That's basically all we're going to do tonight. We might do a little bit of something here and there, but I just kind of want to relax a bit. I want to kind of let you guys take over and kind of build out your Bastions a little further. And then you can just kind of let them play what they want to do, and you just kind of take notes on what's going on. There's probably very little that you would need to adjudicate in that time. So I think that's just very cool. It gives the ability for the DM to take some time off, which I think is great. They said there's up to 29 different rooms. I don't remember if that's how many there were in the playtest. I know there were quite a few, but an individual Bastion will never have more than 6, because that's as many as you can get. And then players can also combine bastions into like a super bastion, but they still manage their own section of that, which is pretty cool. Because I think they also said that there are ways that the bastion can get attacked, and there's mechanics for how to have defenders and how that all sorts out. So there's an advantage of combining bastions, because then you can combine defenders and things like that. So moving on, again, there were the bastion turns, which again they said was about every 7 days. And I still don't know how this is going to work with time, but they also did mention in the Bastion specific video that the DM can adjust how frequently Bastion turns happen, which again, the DM could always do that, but it's good that they mentioned that specifically, that you can do that, because again, a lot of the published adventures, if you wanted to include Bastions in a published adventure, those things happen very quickly. They mentioned Ravenloft kind of jokingly that, having a property within Ravenloft is just kind of a funny idea in general. But again, if it's over 3 weeks, then maybe you need to if you have a bastion somehow, like say you purchased a house there somehow, how do you build that out? Or do you have a bastion turn every couple days? Do you have a bastion turn every 3 days, every day? How do you do that if you want to give your players that sort of power within the game? And I think the Turn of Fortune's Wheel, the Planescape adventure that came out was it earlier this year or late last year, they have sort of it's not officially a bastion, but you do have sort of a Howl's Moving Castle sort of a situation going on that you could basically turn into a bastion if you're running that adventure as well. So you can kind of take things that already exist in the game, sort of make those bastions. Because they did say that, like, oh, if you're running around a lot, then you maybe don't necessarily have the capacity to have a bastion, but you just need a moving castle, right? That's all you need to do. That's all you need to give them. Of course, they might abuse a moving castle, but there are ways to implement these bastions pretty much in any adventure if you're clever enough. So you can give orders to your bastion, such as craft, empower, harvest, maintain, recruit, research, and trade. These kind of do different things, generate passive gold. You can put a teleportation circle in one of your rooms as well. You can get raw materials. In the UA, we saw that you could requisition magic items. These take a long time to get usually, but I thought that's a really cool thing. I don't know if we'll see that in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 2024, or if they maybe shoot that one away if they thought it was maybe a little too powerful to let a player pick a specific item. But they did say that you do need to be there at the bastion to give those orders. And if you're not there, then it just takes the maintain order, which I guess is fair, but it's less fun. So that's my problem with it, because it's just, it's like I want to do the cool things. I don't want it to just maintain. So I was like, okay, what if I'm a spellcaster and I have Magic Mouth and I put a Magic Mouth up in my bastion, and there are hirelings around in your bastion that kind of do all the work while you're gone? So what if I just say, hey, every week, if I'm not here, go to this room and say this trigger word, and you'll get your orders. And it's whatever order that I want to happen for that room. Does that count as me being there in the bastion to give that order? Because again, I've given them that order to go there and take that order. Does that work? I just think it's more fun if you just let the players kind of do the stuff, but we'll see how that all shakes out. I'm very interested in the bastions. I'm very interested in the DM toolbox. I imagine there's gonna be a lot of stuff in the DMG to really go over and pour over and make content about. I'm very excited to see what comes out of it. So let me know what you're excited for down in those comments. What part of the bastions that you've seen in the preview did you think was the most exciting? Was there anything, if you watched the original video from Wizards of the Coast, was there anything they mentioned in there that I didn't mention that you thought was pretty cool? Again, let me know down in those comments. While you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, and again, if you keep clicking on these videos, please consider subscribing. I think we're at 84% of my viewers aren't subscribed yet. That's up from 86 before. So to that new 2%, thank you so much for joining. But yeah, I appreciate your guys' time, and I'll see you on the next one. A new video coming this Wednesday.